Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where I'm going to be talking about using past papers to support your revision. Now, the main question I get is where can you find past papers? Well, if you Google your exam board and the paper, it should come up. Ask your class teacher if you aren't sure which exam board and which paper you do. I currently teach AQA. On the exam board website, you can find the past papers as well as the mark schemes so that you can see the suggested answers. And then there's also lots of example questions on my blog. If you go to the blog and you go to GCSE or A level, whichever one you're doing, and then you can find, if you're doing GCSE, you can find the language paper section, or you can find, Macbeth, the poetry section, whatever. If you're doing A level, the equivalent is there for the different texts that we teach. So once you've found your past paper and the mark scheme, what should you do with it? Well, first of all, I'd suggest answering the questions in timed conditions. If you aren't sure of the timings, check with your class teacher. But generally, the number of marks that you get for the question, you just add on a little bit to get the time. So, for example, if it's language and it's an 8-mark question, you've got about 10 to 12 minutes. If it's language and it's a 40-mark question, you've got about 45 minutes. If it's literature and it's a 30-mark question, you've got about 45 minutes. So check with your class teacher or look at the number of marks and then add on a little bit and then answer the question in timed conditions. Remember what I said in my video about your working environment. So make sure you've got something to lean on, that you're not sitting on your bed, that you eliminate all distractions while you're doing this. So don't be scrolling through Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. Don't be on FaceTime with your friends. Don't have your dog running around your room while you're doing this. Then you can use the mark scheme to check your answers. Now, on the mark schemes, they can be a little bit tricky to interpret. Generally, they include a checklist of what you should have included. Now, in those checklists, it might say things like judicious choice of quotations or judicious choice of references to the text. And you might be looking at that kind of bullet point thinking, I'm not quite sure what that means. So check with your teacher, ask them if they'll go through the mark scheme with you and they'll explain what it means. On the language mark schemes for English language GCSE, it has an example of what students might have written at each level. So for example, for language paper 1, question 2, which is a language analysis question, you can see an example of what a student would write to get 1 or 2 marks, 3 or 4 marks, 5 or 6 marks, 7 or 8 marks. And that can be really useful to get a sense of the kind of thing that you might write. Now, obviously, in English, there's so many different ways to answer a question. So don't get too stressed if the answer on the mark scheme is different to what you've written. It's a suggestion, it's an example to guide you. It's not necessarily saying if you haven't written this, you've got the answer wrong. Okay. And then, of course, the best thing is to ask your teacher to mark the answers. I'm always very happy to mark extra work that my students have done. That is really not a problem. If students want to give me their work. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully that was useful for you.